Greetings and welcome to Lecture 4 on our Ancient Rome unit, Ancient Rome and the Origins of Christianity. Today our outcomes will be talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. So make sure that as we are doing this, you are using your Lecture 4 worksheet in conjunction with this lesson. Feel free to pause the video at any time, just like normal, to catch up on anything you might have missed. And at the end of the video, if you have any questions, please write them down or go back throughout the video to see if you can figure out any missed things that you might have gotten, or feel free to contact me and I'll be more than willing to help you out. So let's get started. A century of crisis. Pax Romana came to an end with Marcus Aurelius, who reigned between 161 AD and 180 AD. So basically 19 years he had power. The rulers that followed were unable to manage the large empire and its growing problems. As with a lot of countries, including the United States, I believe, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to control. And that's exactly what was happening during Rome's time. They had gotten so big and had stretched their resources so thin that it was becoming very, very difficult to control. Other factors also played a role as well, but a lot of those factors could have been are somewhat related to the fact that the empire had just gotten so big. They could not supply themselves, support themselves, or maintain themselves, as we'll see in the upcoming slides. As a result, the Roman Empire began to decline. It was on its way down and out of being a true power in the world. So here we have kind of a Jenga idea. Roman Empire under Augustus was stable, it was secure, and it was powerful. They had a strong military, they had a lot of resources with trade, and those together made it a very powerful nation. However, due to social factors, political factors, economic factors, and military factors, it was only a matter of time before it all came crumbling down. And that's what we're going to take a look at. Many factors weakened Rome over the course of several centuries. By the end, it was too broken to be saved. Here are those four factors kind of outlined with bullet points. This is right out of our book if you want to take a second to pause and get an idea of the different areas of each of these four factors that helped with the decline. Again, political, social, economic, and military. Make sure you are aware of these four because you can pretty much bet that those are going to be test questions. Take a time, pause the video, review each of these four areas and see how the importance of these areas, when they became problems, would eventually implode basically the empire. So let's take a look at these problems. First, we have economic. Trade was disrupted by hostile tribes and pirates. No new gold or silver sources meant that they had to raise taxes in order for the government to maintain its standard of living. So they created more money, which is a bad idea because when they created more money, that equals inflation. What was going on is they ran out of gold and they ran out of silver. So what they did is when they created their coins, they used less gold and less silver. And they mixed it up with other types of metals to give it the same size and the same shape, but not the same value. So if you used an example of, let's say you bought a pot for 5 gold coins 10 years ago. That pot today will not be the same because the coin is not made of the same material. Back then, gold was gold, silver was silver. It was not about credit, it was not what the government said it was worth, it's whatever the gold you had. Because of that, the pot today, instead of being worth 5 gold pieces like it was back then, it might be 20 gold pieces today because that's how much it would take to get the equivalent of amount of gold. Soil in Italy and Western Europe also became increasingly less fertile. Because of that, it hurt agriculture, which did not provide enough food, obviously, for its people. They were over-harvesting not doing crop rotation like we've learned to do now. They didn't know much about fertilization or fertilizing their crops, so the soil just got bad and stopped being able to produce those crops it used to be able to. The problem also existed with political problems. Citizens were losing their patriotism towards Rome. The government began to be controlled by the military instead of by the citizen, or the Senate, or the Caesar. Terrible emperors such as Nero, Commodus, and Caligula murdered, raped, and impoverished their people. So this goes further onto the idea that the people were just not in favor of this whole idea of Rome. They were starting to look after themselves. They did not like their leaders, which kind of is obvious in the fact that all of these Caesars and leaders, a lot of them ended up getting killed because of their bad governing. Let's take a look at some of these bad ones. First, we got Caligula here. He ruled from 37 to 41 AD, lacked experience of a collective decision-making. Not a very bright guy. Rumored to have incest with 3 of his sisters, which is kind of disgusting. Rumored to enjoy torture, messed up, and he wanted to make his horse a member of the Senate. Fortunately, he was stabbed by an imperial bodyguard while watching a gladiatorial show in 41 AD. I think it got to the point where people realized that this guy was a little cuckoo. So, yeah. Moving on to the next freak. We have Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD. We kind of talked about him in our video earlier. He had very little interest in governing and preferred to be a poet and an actor. He pretty much let the city run on its own, which probably is not a good idea. It's believed that he actually burned down part of the city to build his massive palace, which included a man-made lake. He persecuted Christians, even to the point where he blamed the Christians for that fire that took out a good chunk of the city. He was also known for crucifying a lot of Christians and lining them up along the walkway. He's just an all-around bad guy. So bad, he even killed his mother. If you looked at the movie, you remember that his mother is the one that pretty much got him the job of Caesar. So the guy really has no shame. He's just not happy with anybody. Fortunately, again, ended up committing suicide after being deposed by the Senate. Basically, the Senate put a price on his head and said, we'll give so much money for the first person who kills him. Fortunately for whomever, I guess. He was on the run and ended up killing himself. Then you got Commodus. Commodus ruled from 180 to 192 AD. That is where the empire began to erode and the end of the Pax Romana period of Roman history. He was not a very bright guy. He was actually pretty stupid. He ran a hands-off government. Basically, he let the city run itself, didn't want anything to do with it, really. He was not a military leader, no really experience in the military. He was vain and thought of himself like Hercules, fought in the Colosseum, and even renamed Rome Colonia Commodinia, naming it after himself. Yeah, the guy's kind of full of himself. Again, fortunately, he was later on assassinated by eating poisoned beef, and actually ended up being strangled as well because they thought that the poison wasn't going to be good enough. So, I guess 2 times the charm. If you remember watching the movie Gladiator, this was Commodus' character. Obviously a well-to-do guy, thought of himself highly, but not very smart. And the last guy we'll talk about is Augustus. He ruled from 218 to 222 AD, only 4 years. He wanted to make the sun god Elgabal the main deity in the pantheon. It kind of looks like his name, doesn't it? So, yeah. He acted as if he were a god. He ended up building a temple for Elgabal, which appalled a lot of the Roman subjects. He was later murdered by the Praetorian Guard in 222 AD. So it wasn't too secure of a job if you were a bad Caesar, because they got no problems killing you off. So, the third problem we're going to talk about is social. People were slowly losing their confidence in the empire. There became an increasing gap between the rich and the poor, which is still very wide. Kind of sounds like what's going on today with this rich and poor thing going up. And there was a big decline in the interest in public affair. People just were not interested in the government. They didn't care. They were getting fed up with it to the point they just gave up. And when that happens, a lot of bad things can happen, including you get some bad leaders, and eventually these bad leaders try to take too much power, and then there goes the whole idea of a real free government. And the fourth problem was the military. There were low funds for defense. Mercenaries, or foreign soldiers, were hired to accepted lower pay. Soldiers were less disciplined and loyal. Because these mercenaries came out of the area, they were paid to fight. They really didn't care about Rome, the empire itself, this whole idea of Rome. They just cared for the money. They were not loyal to anybody except whoever had the money bags. So this obviously caused a lot of problems. They were not very well motivated to be successful other than to keep their own lives. That's a problem. However, later on, an emperor by the name of, see if I get this right, Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian, he tries to reform this. He became emperor in 284 AD and ruled with an iron fist and limited personal freedoms. He thought that Rome was on a downward spiral, which it was, and he said he needs to take complete control in order to turn it around. In some cases, that works. The trick is when he needs to loosen up that power when he's gotten back what he needed. Additionally, he doubled the size of the army, sought ways to control inflation, and divided the empire into two separate areas, the Greek-speaking East and the Latin-speaking West. So he realized, or it's believed he realized, that the country, or the empire, was just too big for the system they had. So he decided to split it up. Here's kind of how it's split up here. On the east, he kept control of the east with its homeland in Byzantium, and he gave the west over to a guy by the name of Maximilian. Now, Diocletian's, he kept ultimate control over everything, technically, but overall, the Western Empire, he just left to Maximilian to do whatever needed to be done. And then we get to Constantine. Emperor Constantine, he embraced Christianity due to a vision that he had in a battle of Milvian Bridge. The victory at Milvian Bridge made him the sole ruler of Rome. He had a vision that he saw some words, some commands from God that allowed him to actually win the battle. And from that point, he became a Christian. Number 2 here, he was considered the first Christian emperor. He issued the Edict of Milan, which allowed Christians to worship freely. He decided to move the capital of the empire east to Byzantium and built the new city there. The new city was later renamed Constantinople, which is today in modern-day Turkey. It's kind of around where Istanbul is right now. The Eastern Empire flourished due to its trade and wealth. We'll look at a map later, and when we talk about the DBQ, there's a DBQ that talks about this. We won't get into it. But the importance of the fact of the location of Byzantium, the fact that it was kind of like the crossroads of Asia into Europe. In order to get anything from the Middle East, from China, the fastest way was to go through Byzantium. and that's what made that area very rich in trade. The Western Empire crumbles. The decline of the Western Roman Empire took place over many years. The final collapse was due to several issues. First was the worsening internal problems, the separation of the Western Empire from its wealthier East, and outside invasions. The outside invasions were what we call Germanic invasions. We have the Mongolians from here attacking to the north, who are the Huns, and again going into the Middle East, and additionally going into India. When they started going into Europe, it forced the Germanians to attack others as well, to try and push their own culture further south, since the Huns were taking over their area. So the Germanic people were kind of coming in. Mongol nomads, the Huns, forced Germanic people on the empire's borders to push into Roman lands, as I kind of just mentioned. The last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was ousted by Germanic forces in 476 AD. They pushed and pushed, and finally they won and were able to take over the power. Attila the Hun was the actual leader of the Hun army that was pushing its way throughout Asia and into Europe. Here's kind of a picture of him there. I'm not going to spend too much talking about this map, but you can kind of get the idea of how the battle went, and I'll put a link on here as well. Here we have the Huns off to the east here, pushing their way into Europe. Pushing, 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 which is forcing all of these areas here. Whoops, let's go back. Pushing all of these Germanic people further southwest into the Roman territories. Because the Huns were pushing the Germans, the Germanics were pushing their way southern into Roman territory. Eventually, like I said, it would be the Germanics that take over the Roman Empire. Here's kind of a little symbol of Romulus Augustulus deposed. It was more of an announcement that he had been taken over. Also, if you notice the word Augustulus, if you look at your calendar, you might recognize that that is the same as the 8th month of the year of August, which was named after this guy. And here you'll see kind of a dramatization, or just a picture showing the Germanics coming in and taking over Rome. Here on the right side you have the Romans that are all conquered, upset. They're in their white gowns or garb, and then you've got the Germanians, the barbarians coming in and taking over, and you can kind of see who's got the power there with this picture. And because of this, the empire is finished. It comes collapsing on itself because of lack of military, political reasons, economic reasons, and social reasons. The final result was the Western Roman Empire, over here, was no more. But the Eastern Empire would continue to thrive as a region known today as Byzantium. As I mentioned before, Constantinople is right here, and we have Asia, which is in present-day Turkey, the Asia Minor here, Constantinople in the middle, leading into Europe here. As you can see, it's the crossroads, easiest route to get through into Europe without having to go all the way around the Black Sea and around, or having to take boats across the Mediterranean Sea, which was okay too. But by land, this was the easiest way to get your trade into Europe. We'll talk about that in the next lesson. Well, hope you enjoyed this lecture. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. The next slide, I'll make sure that you have a couple links for those of you that are interested in additional resources. And I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Have a great day.